The emergence of foundation models is transforming how enterprises operate and innovate. Devesh Mishra, President and Chief Product and Technology Officer of Core AI at Keystone, joins Professor Marco Iansiti, the David Skarnoff Professor of Business Administration at Harvard Business School. He's also the author of Competing in the Age of AI. Their combined expertise in AI implementation and digital strategy offers a really unique lens on the future of business transformation. Welcome.
That's right. Good? We're good. All right, let's go.
Let's go.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Super excited to be here. If you can find the clicker, which we did, we can go on and I think have a sort of an interesting time. Now that we know that we have AI and agents everywhere, transforming work, transforming information work, transforming strategy, transforming the firm, we want to dig in a little bit and talk about how this stuff actually works a little bit maybe and how this stuff is actually done. So let's take a look. This is actually my random picture that actually my 3-year-old granddaughter really liked. So we did have a focus group on this one, which is, draw a beautiful network AI pattern. But we start from, of course, this book, which is really came out just a couple of years ago. And the thing that is absolutely insane about this book is how incredibly out of date it already is, and as an author, I got to say, Devesh, I don't know, what am I doing, with all this stuff, and it's crazy because just in a couple of years, so much has been done in the space. The field has really transformed itself in all kinds of amazing ways. And it's just fascinating. So right now we're working on the next one. The only question is, can we actually get a book done before the field changes again? And so that's become a very, very difficult thing. But anyway, so what's happened? I think in many ways this happened. There was this paper that came out in 2017. A bunch of people from Google, sorry Microsoft, sorry Amazon, all this stuff, they came out and wrote a paper that in many ways transformed the world, literally. And it's fundamentally a different kind of architecture for a model that really builds on a trend where the AI is getting bigger and bigger. The models are getting broader and broader. And this kind of broad AI is really changing fundamentally the way that the world is working. These models now can come pre-trained, like in many ways we come pre-trained, right? Whenever we approach a problem, we have a pre-training in many different problems before. And our mind is actually very good at picking out what from our previous experience is actually relevant to what we're doing right now, right? And that's a fundamental invention that really has changed the game. They're scalable. They work in parallel, actually, which is pretty interesting, right? So if you look at how ChatGPT actually works, right, it doesn't predict the next word from the previous word. It takes the whole prompt, right, breaks it down in chunks, feeds it into a parallel process. The answer emerges together, okay? And that delivers actually what the conversation is about. And it's why it's so incredibly good at picking up the context of a conversation, right? Because it's not just about from one word to the next word. It's the whole thing. It's a systems level approach to really parsing meaning out of something. It's fundamentally different and interesting. And all of this is really about the attention mechanism, which is one of the things that this paper really did very differently. This is the first paper that came out that actually used the attention mechanism to drive sort of the entire sort of essentially architecture of the model in a certain way, without recurrence or without other things that we usually use together with it. So let's dig into this for just 1 minute. Traditional AI, right? Kareem and I wrote this great book. It's all about cranking out individual models. So, and the way it works is kind of simple, right? You get data. Ideally, you put the data in some kind of nice repository like a data lake. Then you take that data, you train one model for a specific use case, right? That's how machine learning typically has worked in the past. Data, train model, supervised learning. all the kind of good stuff. So a bunch of individual models where the data is coupled to the models, like our famous cats and dogs problem, right? You want to recognize cats from dogs. What you do is you train the model with a bunch of cat pictures. Maybe you train the model with a bunch of dog pictures, and so it can tell the difference from one to the other. That's supervised learning. Okay, this is my little mini course. The problem is, what happens if you want to recognize a cow? No good, right? Or you recognize a car, recognize anything, right? So very specific models, specific data trained for it. And obviously there are all kinds of variants around this, and it's a little more complicated than I'm making it for sure. But that's sort of the fundamental idea, right? So what about a transformer, right? What do you see in this picture? What's the first thing that comes out? Train? Yeah? So why do you see the train? You see the train because your brain is paying attention, right? And you have a train that's coming at you, and so your brain is trained to say, oh, wow, this is the thing, it's right in the middle, it's coming at me. I'm looking at the train, I'm looking at absolutely everything, but focusing in on what matters the most for the problem at hand, which is getting out of the way of the train, right? That's your attention mechanism at work. You got a lot of complexity, big foundation of everything, lots of data, right, of anything. And what you don't see, for example, is up there's a little picture of the transformer that's kind of stuck up there, just kind of to confuse everything a little bit, right? Because your brain doesn't pay attention to that because you're worried about the train coming to hit you and stuff like that. So these kinds of models are so different. It's like cats versus dog, all of a sudden it's like everything comes at you and your brain is able to figure out what's important. That's how these models essentially work. So these 5 properties of AI that are now really transforming everything. The first one, to me, is really fundamentally a reasoning engine that's changing the way that the AI works, right? The reasoning is much more system-wide. It's more holistic in how it works than typical AI. It takes sort of a broad-based foundation, right? And then you have some mechanism to focus that foundation on what's relevant at hand. Attention mechanisms is one way, there are other ways as well. But the whole generation that does this, then of course we talk about communication. The communication piece kind of falls out of this idea, right? Again, we pick up the context, we train this model on every word ever said on the internet, on everything, and yet you ask it about, best place to go have dinner in Dubai, and it gives you the specific answer out. That's the attention mechanism at work. Learning, this thing can compress everything. It's a compression algorithm. It's actually kind of an interesting way. It's built a little different from traditional AI in that the data, in some ways, is actually embedded in the model itself, right? This thing comes pre-trained, compresses a huge amount of data. It's all sitting in there in all this little, this big neural network that is trained, and that's what provides the foundation to then go out there and solve problems. Agency, right? This thing can actually make decisions for you if you want. It's an old idea. It's been around in AI for a long time, and the agents are getting more and more interesting in many ways. And then finally, networks, like everything in software, you can connect different agents to each other, agents to assistants, and so on. But these properties are now really transformational in a variety of different ways. This is a slide that I actually stole from my friends at Microsoft, where so that now we have fundamentally 2 different types of AI that you can use, right, to go out there and thread through solutions. You can build a whole bunch of machine learning models, individual narrow things, right? You want to go and recognize cats and dogs, might as well do a little narrow model. But the huge innovation is these massive models that are now much more general. It can provide all kinds of applications. Now, the most important thing here in this talk, this kind of idea does not only apply to text communication or even the generation of videos and things like that, right? There's a whole range of different models that are broad-based foundation models where you can sample different kinds of data to solve different kinds of problems. So basically, what could you do? So you build a huge foundation based on all the relevant data. So you want to pick a problem like forecasting, okay? And you want to build a forecast, and that forecast maybe is something that you use at the top level, right? About you want to forecast what your own revenues are going to be next year. But then you have also bottom level forecast, which is like, well, how many of those, what were those caffeine things that you were talking? Yeah, caffeine gummy bears, right? Somehow the caffeine, so if you imagine the whole Amazon revenue base, At one point, you have the forecast for caffeine gummy bears. At the one point, you have the $100 billion worth of revenues that the company actually has, right? Those are all forecasts, just at different levels. Now, traditionally, you would have trained a different model for each one of those things. You had individual workers, MBAs, going out there, fight for their own model and fight for their own budget, responding to the model. Now, you're starting to be able to kind of integrate these things into an effort where you take a much larger, broader, broad-based foundation that can be tuned, adjusted, essentially prompted, okay? The way that you prompt ChatGPT, essentially how it works, to target specific kinds of models. And so all of a sudden, these broad-based models really are changing the enterprise big time, right? You don't go out there and pump out a million different tiny little point solutions. I don't know how many of you have heard about the death by pilot thing, right? So you crank out a million different pilots, and then you can't really get any of those to really work in practice. Now, it's like it's a much more focused strategic effort to go out there and pick out the kinds of things that you can do one after the other. So this essentially is fast-forwarding us towards a new kind of enterprise, right? Because you can sort of imagine sort of where this is going, where you have a whole bunch of different foundation models. Some of them will be LLMs, right? Some of them will go out there and turn us all into smarter and better and more cross-functional people. But others will be aimed at other things. Others, the kind of foundation models will be out there forecasting products in different ways. Other kinds of foundation models these days, like they can do protein folding and involved in R&D and pharmaceutical research. Other kinds of foundation models are ones that are really aimed at applications in marketing, applications in terms of understanding customer value, and even you can start to embed causality into these models as well. It's actually a very exciting, rapidly changing field. This is where I'm kind of running out of things to talk about, and so I brought my friend Devesh here, who's actually done this, right? So there's a little company down the street from Microsoft called Amazon, I think.
Very small company, yeah.
A small little thing. Yeah, and Devesh actually spent about 15 years.
16, totally.
16. I always get this wrong. 16 years out there really driving the AI that is basically transformed Amazon's own operational systems and operating model altogether. So, and I wanted to tell the story because this is kind of how they did it, and they actually did it in practice. It's the big green one.
Thanks, Marco. So, by the way, since Marco already gave the master class on AI, being a technologist, I'm not going to talk about AI. I'm going to talk about the journey we took at Amazon when we started thinking about how to completely transform our operating and the business model. And this is the same work actually we are doing with a lot of companies across the globe. And the journey actually I've seen, the patterns is very, very similar. So I firmly believe that a lot of times people, and I've been in technology industry for almost 28 years, I think a lot of time people start with the technology and then start thinking about what are the nails I should find, like they have a hammer, and then they're trying to find the nail. But I think most of the cases where if you really want to transform your organization and your industry, you have to start with the business problem that you're trying to solve. And when you think about Amazon, as you were saying, everybody thinks about Amazon as this big, giant, $2.5 trillion company, right? But imagine Amazon in 2009. It was a $25 billion company which was still growing at the rate of 25 or 30%. And in one of the leadership offsite, Jeff asked a question, what will it take for Amazon to be a truly global company, a $100 billion plus company? And every transformation like that, it starts with a big why. So his main question was why we are not there. And that led us to take a step back.
Devesh was Jeff. This is D. Jeff.
Yeah, D. Jeff. Yeah.
D. Jeff. Okay, just a bit. And he's kind of an intense.
He's super intense.
So when he says do it, like.
Yeah, exactly. Do it.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not a lecture. You have to do it.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
But after that, when he asked that question, we took a step back, and then we started thinking about what is preventing us from reaching to that ambition of growing to be a $100 billion global company. And there were three dimensions that became very apparent to us. One was manual processes. So even a $25 billion company that time was run totally based on the Excel sheets. And what was happening is, as business was becoming more and more complex, we were adding more and more people, which is a good thing. So what we were doing is we were hiring 1,000 people, and their job was to train next 1,000 people. And we were not able to codify anything in the company, and that was preventing us from scaling. So that was problem number one. And a lot of this high volume decisions, right? How much to buy across this 50 million items was done in a very inefficient way. So that was first. The second thing, which is also very important, is the way you design your organization also start dictating how you're designing your data and your systems. And what is happening is most of the decisions that time was based on human intuition only, not based on AI or logic. So for example, in Amazon case, there were 50 businesses we were in the US, multiplied by 12 countries. So all these 600 businesses were run completely based on human intuition. And what was happening is, when we took a step back, what was happening is the 1,000 people that I was talking about that we were hiring, they started creating millions and millions of sheets. And nobody had this horizontal idea about what's happening in the company, which was insane. And then the last thing actually is Jeff always wanted Amazon to be to be Earth's most customer-centric company, which is a passion he always had. But we did not have a common currency. We did not have a way to really understand what is the long-term value of a decision, and then how do we make sure that all the verticals within Amazon are kind of optimizing for the same thing versus fighting against each other. So those were the three problems we saw, and what we did is, after that, by the way, whenever your boss asks you a $100 billion question, what is the next thing you should do? You should start thinking about $500 billion, right? And the reason is, by the way, I'm half joking. The reason Jeff asked this $100 billion question is, he wanted us to think not incrementally, but think about a completely unconstrained view of how the world could look like, and then work backwards from there. That was the underlying why question he was asking. And when we did that, there were 5 components actually, which is a common theme I always see, which became very obvious to us, is this high volume decisions that has to be fully automated. And this, the journey that we were taking was not just about automation. It is about how do you run your business optimally. So it has to be very, very cutting edge AI models. The third thing is, and this is where most of the companies fail, is how do you design, when you're building your AI and all that, how you're designing it in a way that you are creating a flywheel of humans and machines working together, not humans versus machines. The fourth component was, as Marco was saying, in Amazon we had 200 million items, right? You can make decisions at a very aggregate level, or if you want to be optimal, you have to have the fine-grained information. So how do you structure your data so that it is not in silos, but it is kind of looking end-to-end across the platform? And the last thing was, when you're running an organization like that, how do you make sure the organization is not fighting against each other? How do you come up with the objective function so that it is optimizing for the long-term free cash flow versus trying to fight against each other? And for that, actually, by the way, since so far I've not spoken about AI, and there's a reason that, because if you want to really, really transform your company, you have to, one thing we realize is we have to completely change our mental model. And what we meant by that is whatever tasks, the mundane tasks that can be done by AI and machine, let machine run it. That does not mean that we don't need any humans. What it means is that it frees up humans to really, really focus on high value-add activities, high judgment decisions, and more creative work. So that is the first thing actually we did. And also we focus a lot on how do you start shifting or designing the organization in a way where AI is focused on the output, but how do you start shifting the focus of the teams on the input? So how do you make sure that the humans are adding inputs to the machine so the machines is getting smarter and faster every day? The second thing that we realized, by the way, this is something I've seen in a lot of companies in terms of how they are organized, is in this world of AI, it cannot be that you have somebody talking to the end customer, and then you have 5 or 6 layers between that to the software engineer who's finally writing a code in isolation. The way the magic happens is when you structure your teams in terms of a triad. And what I meant by triad is combination of AI engineers, scientists, and product managers in the same team trying to do that magic. And that's when you can start driving the business outcome for the company. And then the last one is, like, instead of thinking about a point solution, how can you completely transform your operating model by thinking end-to-end versus thinking in isolation? And whether this slide is super important, because a lot of time I get asked questions, like people think that I hate humans, whenever I talk about 100% automation. But the super important thing is, how do you design your organization and your system in a way that humans can create this flywheel by focusing on the input, fine-tuning the algorithms, right? And by the way, this is the shift that is happening. Business people are getting, world is getting more and more technical. That means business people have to learn about technology, and the technology people have to learn about business, vice versa, right? The lines are getting very, very blurrier, right? And how do you make sure that humans are now able to audit machines? See, in business, it was super easy for a human to audit a human. You can look at the expression and all that, but how do you ask a question to a machine? And in this journey, when we started this journey, only in the beginning, only 10% of the things we used to buy from our vendors were bought through AI. Fast forward, before I left Amazon, almost like 99.9% of the things we were buying from our vendors, which was about $200 billion worth of item, was bought without any human touch, right? And people used to ask me, what keeps you awake at night? Think about a machine which is getting up in the morning and buying $600 million worth of item. And I used to wonder, what if the machine gets up in the morning and goes crazy and buys stuff that nobody wants? Then you start thinking about financial auditing to everything in a totally, totally different way. And that's why I think you have to, when you're thinking about AI, is also thinking about how do you design this whole organization and ecosystem in a way that you can leverage the value out of it. You mentioned about foundation models. By the way, that was a long journey. We started focusing on AI starting in 2009 with the basic models. But then finally in 2021, Amazon launched this transformer model. By transformer model, what we meant was there's just one single model, which is completely forecasting for more than 200 million items for Amazon globally, across all businesses, across all categories, across all countries. And
how many items again?
200 million.
200 million.
And that is the power of AI, right? How can you use these large data sets to completely transform the company? And that leads to basically, by the way, one of the things actually, as I'm talking about Amazon, is what I've seen is, like, a lot of companies, when I had a fortune of also working with a lot of our customers and our vendors, is Amazon has a lot of data, right? So in Amazon, it was relatively easier for us to build AI models because of the data we had. But a lot of companies outside Amazon, they don't have a lot of data sets, right? And that's why this transformer-based pre-trained model is going to be a game changer on how we can then help other companies help through operational and commercial AI. And that's why I'm super passionate about transforming and helping other companies on how we can kind of take the same journey that we did at Amazon, but instead of taking 10 years, how can we do it in 1 or 2 years?
Very cool. So just to recap things a little bit, to me, it's kind of interesting. Obviously, AI is now mainstream, right? Everybody's excited about this. Everybody's got questions about where this thing is going. But people are also starting to asking a sort of deeper question in terms of where is the value, what is actually strategic about AI, and what is actually core about AI, right? So there are a lot of things that we can do with LLMs that are very exciting and very interesting. And a lot of companies that go out there and drive many different kinds of projects are on LLMs and ChatGPT and various things like that. But then the question is, how many of these kinds of things are really going to differentiate the company at the end, right? I mean, earlier it's like, how many of you are playing with ChatGPT? And everybody's hands go up. That is fantastic because everybody's playing with it, but it also means that that's probably not the way you're going to differentiate, right? The way you're going to differentiate is by doing unique things that really are core to the business. And this is where the models get really interesting, right? And this is where there's a whole range of models. I mean, again, even transformers are just one subset. But the wonderful thing, actually Sam Altman wrote this little blog, which was fun. And basically, there's one quote in there which I love, which is basically like, deep learning worked. That's kind of the essence of it. I think back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, everybody was sort of wondering, is this thing actually going to get anywhere? Are these models really going to converge? I mean, these massive things. They did. And now that they actually came down and converged, we really have a way to go out there, and there's a whole arsenal of these things, a whole range of different kinds of models that can be tuned, refined, prompted to do individual things. And it's really changed the way AI works. This is why we need to write a new book. Been trying to convince Kareem, but he's too busy. So building great things around this. AI has become mainstream and things are changing. So these kind of attention-based systems I think are really interesting. I really do think that paper, the 2017 paper, was, pardon the pun, but really transformational. It changed the world in many different ways. And it really put on the map this idea of these broad-based models. The term foundation model was coined at Stanford in 2021. So a fair amount of time after this paper, really reflecting on what was being different. And it turns out it's a pretty broad category. You can do a lot of, it's the whole idea of broad AI. It's the stuff that as models that are much bigger than a single application that essentially learn themselves how they can be optimized and refined and focus in on one specific thing. AI is transforming the firm's operating model, and AI is becoming really core to strategy and differentiation in many different ways. So if you look at something like, what is, if you look at Amazon's retail business, right? What's core to the business? I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is supply chain, right? And so it's really the idea that as you go forward, right? Now it's like, okay, Amazon is one example. We're working on there's a bunch of different other organizations that are starting to think about things in the same way. If you go to Medtronic and sort of how they're differentiating themselves today, even if you go to the Mayo Clinic, and you talk to them about how they're actually starting to think about their own capabilities different. And it's really the idea that there's a bunch of AI that is going to come out and be table stakes for everyone, and everybody's going to have to deploy it and use it. Otherwise, you're going to fall behind, right? But there's also going to be a generation of AI that's going to be your own secret special sauce, which is going to come in models that are largely pre-trained that you can go out there and touch and adapt to your own individual business. And this way, your core competencies and capabilities, much of that is going to end up. And thank you all very much.